Today I want to revisit the passage of Scripture that shows us the prayer that Jesus prayed before he went to the cross. And I know recently I've used that passage in sermons, but there's so much that goes on with this passage, and I want to look at it again. But this time I want to answer a very problematic question by using this passage. Before Jesus was crucified, he prayed for the disciples. You can go to John 17 and read that prayer. He prays for the disciples, and then he extends that prayer to anybody who will follow or believe in him based on their testimony. That's you. That's me. We believe in Jesus Christ because of what they passed down to us. We see the Word of God, the letters that they wrote. We see their testimony, and we believe in Christ because of their testimony. But before we take a look at the prayer, I want to stir the pot a little bit. I want to go ahead and get that spoon in there, and I want to stir the pot a little bit and bring some clarity to a very important topic. Let's take a few minutes and let's look through the book of Acts to see what was going on during that first century church. By the way, if you ever do the study on the first century church, they were amazing people. What happened back then was incredible. And the hardships that they went through, we've never seen anything like that. So it's really awesome to do a study on that. If studies are what you do, you're like, man, I graduated from high school, I'm done. Graduated from college, I'm done. Well, I did both of those things too. It turns out I'm not done. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of study that you can do, and a lot of growth you can get from those studies. So I encourage you to do that. But if you were to look at the first century church, you'd be amazed at those people and what they did. So let's take a few minutes to look at what they did. In the early 1900s, by the way, that's not the first century. We just walked out of you. Some of you were born in that century or that millennium, if you want to look at it that way. It's a rough one, isn't it, to be who we are now? Like, I was born back in the 1900s. Yeah, I'm that old too. So back in the 1900s, early in the 1900s, there was a movement that entered into the United States. It was called snake handling or serpent handling. And maybe you've heard of it, maybe you've seen movies or something with this involved. Poisonous snakes would be brought into the church, and they would be handed to the people in attendance. So deacons, if you would, please bring the snakes in. No, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. They would bring snakes in, poisonous snakes, into the service. They still do it today. In certain parts down south, they still have churches that do this. They bring snakes into the service. If a snake were to bite you, the next move is yours. So you just focus at that point. If a snake were to bite you during that service, the next move is on you. If you have enough faith, it will not harm you. But if you don't have enough faith, you will die. It's your choice. This is the part of the service where you come in. I got bit. Okay, we're watching. I hope I have enough faith. We do too. But it's all on you now. I hope I have enough faith. I hope I have enough faith because I've already been bit. Now the next move's mine. This really does happen. Sounds like a good time, doesn't it? It sounds like, yeah, let's try just one Sunday like that. The attendance would be very low that week. Nobody's going to do that. We know we're not going to participate in a service like that. Why would anybody ever think that was a good idea? Where would they get a crazy thought like this? The Bible, that's where they get the thought like this. It's found in the book of Acts. Paul the Apostle had just arrived in the island of Malta. He just went through a shipwreck. He's on the island of Malta now. And the natives have built a fire for him to help him get warm. And then this happens. Look at Acts chapter 28 in verse 3. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. So when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he has escaped the sea, yet justice does not allow to live." But he shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. However, they were expecting that he would swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But after they had looked for a long time and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Yes, this event did happen to Paul. No, don't try this at home. It did happen to Paul. It was something that he went through. This was his experience. This did happen to him. When the snake bit Paul, the natives assumed that Paul was a murderer. I mean, after all, people often think God's out to get us, right? Oh, we did something wrong, so God's going to punish me. No, he's not. He punished his son for your sin. You don't have to worry about that. You might have consequences for your sin, but you don't have God chasing after you to punish you for your sin. But people often think that, and that's what they're thinking. Oh, he must have been a murderer because the snake bit him. God's got him. God's after Paul. But when he didn't die, they assumed, oh, he's a god. Either way, they got it wrong. Either way, they got it wrong. God did something amazing for Paul here, but this doesn't mean that we should put it into practice today. We're not going to do that. You can take that big sigh of relief. I thought we might have been going that direction, but we're not. We're not going to do this because it doesn't make sense for us to do something like this. But that doesn't stop some people from doing it. This actually does happen in services. Maybe even right now, today, it is happening somewhere in the United States. So they're doing this today. This stuff really happens in our own country. Let's take a look at another event that happened in the first century. This is something that did happen during the first church. Look at Acts chapter 14 and verse 8. It says, and in Lystra, a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently, and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, stand up straight on your feet. And he leaped and walked. Now when the people saw that what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in the Lycaonian language, the gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. Paul is just passing through town when he sees a man who has never experienced the feeling of walking. He's never walked in his entire life. He picks up on the fact that this man has faith. He is actually seeking the one true God. And he picks up on the fact that this man has the right heart. He's actually seeking God. So he tells the man to stand up, and it works. He's able to stand up on his feet, and he's able to walk now. The townspeople immediately interpret what just happened as Paul being some kind of a demigod. Paul is a god. Because people don't do this. Paul must be a god. Same thing the people on the island of Malta did. Oh, he didn't die. Look at that, he's a god. These people do the same thing. He raised a man, the lame is now walking. He's a god. Isn't it amazing all the deductive reasoning we use as human beings? The conclusions we come to, the assumptions we make. They assume, oh, look at that, he's a demigod. Paul has just commanded a lame man to walk, and he's also been bitten by a snake, which didn't affect him at all. But Paul wasn't the only person who was going around doing these kind of things. It wasn't just Paul. There's other things going on too. Look at this next event. Check this next one out. There's another lame man sitting at the gate begging. This time it's Peter and John who are in the story, not Paul. When the lame man asks for a little bit of money, this is the response that Peter gives to the lame man. Look at Acts chapter 3 and verse 6. Then Peter said, silver and gold I do not have, but what I do have I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And he took him by the right hand and lifted him up, and immediately his feet and ankle bones received strength. That's incredible stuff. That's pretty awesome. Snake bites that are ineffective, every one of us would sign up for that one. Yeah, if I get bit by a snake, I just don't want it to bother me. Yeah, we would all want that. Lame people getting up and walking. Last I checked, these men were not doctors. The 12 disciples are not doctors. They are just fishermen, former tax collectors, common men. They're not even doctors. They look like everyone else. They even had the same abilities as everyone else. These are just people. These are just regular guys. But God used them to do remarkable things. And it wasn't limited to Peter and Paul either. It didn't just stop there. Jesus had already ascended back into heaven, and the disciples were getting a lot of attention during the first century church. Look at what happens in chapter 5 of the book of Acts. Chapter 5 and verse 12. And through the hands of the apostles, many signs and wonders were done among the people, and they were all with one accord in Solomon's porch. Yet none of the rest dared join them. But the people esteemed them highly, and believers were increasingly added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women, so that they brought the sick out of the streets and laid them on beds and couches, that at least the shadow of Peter passing by might fall on some of them. Also, a multitude gathered from the surrounding cities to Jerusalem, bringing sick people and those who were tormented by unclean spirits, and they were all healed. Something extraordinary is happening here. This is an awesome church. This is an awesome century. Individuals were bringing people from other cities to be healed by the apostles. God was performing many signs and wonders through the lives of these people. Unnatural events are taking place. This was really happening. It's not just stories in the Bible. This was actually happening. Unnatural events are taking place. These are just a few of the things that were going down in the first century church. There's just a few of them. We could read through the whole book of Acts and see what was happening, but these are just a few of them. That would have been an amazing time to live in. But it came with its dark side too. This is the same period of time where Christians were being hunted down and killed. Like, man, I really wish I could see those things happen. I really wish I could be there. Well, the other side of the coin doesn't look so nice. People were being hunted down. People were being killed. Also, historically, it has been recorded that what Jesus said was going to happen was actually happening at that time. Look at Matthew 24 and verse 4. It says, and Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. Many people were still looking for the Messiah. Even the Jews today are still looking for the Messiah because they don't believe that Jesus was their Messiah. So a lot of people are still looking for the Messiah today, and just like they were in that day. And the apostles were trying to declare that Jesus is the true Messiah. They're trying to let them know, no, it's Jesus. You don't have to look anymore. The true Messiah is here. As the apostles were trying to lead people to Christ, many deceivers were coming in and trying to draw them to themselves. Like, I'm the Christ. So now you got a little bit of a problem. The apostles are trying to point to Jesus, and everybody else is saying, it's not Jesus. I'm the real Messiah. So you got a little bit of confusion going on here. Why would anybody want to be a follower of Jesus when all his followers were being hunted down and or killed, and others were telling people that Jesus was the false Messiah? Why would anybody want to follow Jesus? Like, that's going to come with a huge price. I could get killed if I follow Jesus, but if I follow this other guy that says he is the Christ, he is the Messiah, it's not as dangerous to follow him. So why wouldn't I just follow this guy? What makes Jesus the real Messiah? To top it all off, the disciples were untrained in religious things. Remember, these are fishermen and former tax collectors and just common people. They're not trained in religious things. They were Jews, not scholars. These are just basic guys. They were uneducated. How were they supposed to convince anyone that what they were preaching was true? What I'm preaching is the truth. Yeah. Who are you? Oh, really? Jesus is the Messiah. How are they supposed to convince anybody? Galilee was known for its simplicity, not for its prestige. Galilee wasn't much. Jesus taught these men personally, and they had a better understanding of God than the religious leaders had, because they learned straight from God. They learned from Jesus. They had a better understanding of who God was. And because they knew that they had the truth, they spoke boldly and factually. Jesus is the Messiah. And they had a boldness about them when they spoke. Look at the response of the crowd Peter and John were preaching to in Acts chapter 4. Verse 13. Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated and untrained men, they marveled, and they realized that they had been with Jesus. Galilee was a poor region. Judas Iscariot was the only disciple that did not come from the region of Galilee. The other 11 were from Galilee. They were from that region. The uneducated, the poor folk, that's where God went ahead and picked the disciples from that region. Judas Iscariot was the only one that wasn't there. And also, during Acts, Judas Iscariot is the only one that wasn't there because he ended up committing suicide after he betrayed Jesus. So now you got 11 guys from Galilee. Jesus chose 11 uneducated, untrained men to get the gospel to the rest of the world. Those are the ones I want. I'm going to choose these guys. We see the barrier during the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. We can see this barrier that's going on here. God allows the disciples to speak, and everyone heard the gospel in their own native tongue. They're speaking, and God allows everybody to hear it in their own language. This made people trust the validity of their message. Look at Acts chapter 2 and verse 7. Then they were all amazed and marveled, saying to one another, "Look, are not all these who speak Galileans? And how is it that we hear each in our own language in which we were born?" The reputation of the apostles was getting around. These 11 guys, people are starting to take notice. Yeah, these guys they get bit by snakes. They tell the lame to get up and walk. They speak and we hear it in our own language. Things are happening with these 11 guys. Signs and wonders are being performed through their lives. So here's the big question that I want to ask today. Here's the big one. Why aren't we seeing these same things happening today? If God was able to do it then, why don't we see it happening today? Why aren't you coming up and talking to me and I'm just healing you of whatever's going on in your life? Why is that not going on today? What are we missing? What happened? What happened? Why is the first century church recorded to have done all these things? And now in 2023, we're like, yeah, I don't know how to do that. But I'm praying for you. That's what we got. That's in our arsenal. That's all we have in our arsenal. What's going on? What changed? Why isn't it happening today? Wouldn't people just flock to God? Don't you think people would just flock to God if we saw church people performing these same acts today? The answer is no. No, they would not. They would not be flocking to God. There was a time when Jesus spoke about the rich man and Lazarus, if you remember when he was telling that story about the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man died and he was being tormented in hell, and while Lazarus had died and he was in paradise. The rich man asked if Lazarus could be sent back from the dead to warn his brothers about hell. Would you send Lazarus back to warn my brothers that they don't want to come here? Would you please do that? Look at the response he got in Luke chapter 16 and verse 31. But he said to him, "If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded though one rise from the dead." Even if somebody came back from the dead, they're not going to listen. People are not persuaded to have a relationship with God because of miracles. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. We could be out performing miracles. Just case in point, think about Jesus. He rose from the dead. The people that killed him were able to see him after he rose from the dead. Did they say, well, let's go ahead and follow him? No, they didn't. What they do, they paid people to tell the story that the disciples stole his body. Like, yeah, he's back from the dead. Okay, we've got a problem. Let's get the rumor going on that the disciples stole his body. Let's not believe. Miracles don't persuade people to follow God. It doesn't work. It does not work. They're not going to follow you just because you are able to perform a miracle. In the book of Acts, God was performing miracles left and right in the lives of the apostles. You're seeing this stuff happen all through the book of Acts. God sent his Holy Spirit to live in them just like he does for us today. The Holy Spirit lives in us just like the Holy Spirit lived in them. But God did some amazing things to validate that their message was true. Remember, they were a bunch of uneducated Galileans. You know that fisherman? Yeah, he's got it going on. He's got it going on. Today we have many denominations and religions that are trying to mimic the acts of the apostles. Today we still see that there are a lot of people out there trying to do the same thing. But they're missing one very big detail. The actual name of the book of Acts is not Acts. That's not the actual name of that book. The book's name is actually the Acts of the Apostles, not the Acts of the 21st century Christian. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And now I'm not saying that God can't do any of these things today, because he absolutely could. God could do he can do whatever he wants to do. He can do that. I'm just saying that it was never supposed to be our focus. Well, a lot of times people are focused on, maybe if I can do this, maybe if I have enough faith, then I can do this thing or that thing or the other. That was never supposed to be our focus. And this is not what God is up to today. Jesus never told his disciples to validate themselves by performing miracles. I'm talking about us. He never told us to validate ourselves by performing miracles. God used miracles to confirm that the disciples' message was true, just like he did to confirm that Jesus was the true Messiah. He was actually God in the flesh. Miracles were there to show that Jesus was who he said he was. Miracles were shown or used to show that the disciples were actually telling the truth. These uneducated men are doing things that they shouldn't be able to do. The very first generation after Jesus goes back to heaven, there's some validation here. These guys, they're not doing just normal stuff. God is using these men. We were never called to go out and perform miracles. Like, well, that's good because I'm really bad at it. I'm really bad at this. That was never your calling. God never told you to go out and perform miracles. But Jesus did tell us that there was something that would validate who you were. Jesus did say there is a validation. There is something that will tell people that you're with me. And it's not performing miracles. This is the one thing he gave us to validate that we are his disciples. Look at John chapter 13 and verse 35. By this, all will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. That is the only thing that God said will validate you. It's not performing miracles. It's not making the lame walk and healing people and speaking in tongues and going out and performing these miracles where people say, well, look, a miracle, that must be God. That God never said, this is your calling. No, he said, you want validation? This is how they will know. This is how they'll know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. That's the only validation we were ever given. It's love. It's love. When people put all their hope into healings and put the possibility of performing miracles themselves, they end up feeling crushed when it doesn't happen. Man, I put so much faith in that. Why didn't it happen? They feel that they didn't have enough faith to accomplish it, and they begin to doubt God. Why isn't God using me? Why is what I prayed for not happening? The perspective of life changes at that point. They aren't just understanding that life is going to happen and God's going to be there with them all the way through it. That's not what they're understanding. Like, it's getting rough right now, and what I'm praying for is not happening, but that doesn't mean that God's forsaken me. No, he's still there with you. They're not thinking about that. They're thinking, what did I do wrong? Or why is God not there for me anymore? Because they put their faith in the miracle itself. They were waiting for something big to happen, and when it didn't happen, they start doubting. They start believing that if life isn't happening in a specific way, then they are doing something wrong, or God is not acting just because he's displeased with them. Because you put your faith in the wrong thing. You put your faith in faith itself. If I just believe enough, then it will happen. You put your faith in faith. And when nothing happened, you feel like God turned his back on you, or maybe you've done something to turn your back on God, and it crushes you. Many church services have the ability to cause an emotional high, but God isn't wanting us to live through feelings and emotions. That's not what God's wanting us to do. He wants us to live through a transformed life. That's what he wants us to live through. Not feelings and emotions, but a transformed life. To see the book of the Acts of the Apostles as portraying actions we are also supposed to be performing gives us an unhealthy view of God and an unhealthy view of faith. I should be able to do these things too. No. God used those men to do those things to point to him as the Messiah. That is what he did. That doesn't mean in 2023 you should be out doing the same thing. It's not supposed to be like that. God says if you want to be validated, there's one way to do it. Love. That's your validation. That's it. You don't have to be really super cool. It's not about you. It's not about what you're able to do. It's about what he has already done and about the love that comes through your life. That is what it's about. It's love. Love is the validation. This is the miracle that God gives us as evidence that we are his disciples. And by the way, it is a miracle. Love is a miracle. We just kind of look over it a lot. Let's take a look at that prayer. John 17, that prayer that I was talking about. Let's go ahead and take a look at that prayer one more time here. John 17 and verse 22. In the glory which you gave me, I have given them, that they may be one, just as we are one. I and them, and you and me, that they may be perfect in one. And that the world may know that you have sent me, and have loved them as you have loved me. How is the world supposed to know that Jesus is the one who God sent? How are they supposed to know that we are his disciples? The answer is oneness. It's oneness. The answer is relationship. That's the answer. You want to be validated as a disciple? You want to be validated as a Christian, somebody who's following Christ? That's it. Relationship and love. That's your validation. The relationship should be so untainted that it convinces the world that that is supernatural. That love is incredible. That is a miracle itself. To see the love of God expressed to your fellow man is almost unheard of. Go out and just watch people. It's almost unheard of to see somebody loving like that. This is the moment, these are the kind of moments where you see Jesus saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, while he's being crucified by those same people. How do you love like that, Jesus? What is that? That's unheard of. That's unnatural right there. It's those moments when Stephen is being stoned to death, saying, Father, do not lay this to their account. They're killing you, Stephen. I know. Could you go ahead and reach them even after this is over, after I'm dead? Don't lay this to their account. They need to be saved too. That's unnatural. That is completely unnatural. It's when people see the church coming together with an outpouring of love for people's soul, when they notice a supernatural love. When they look at the church and go, what is wrong with you people? Shouldn't you be, shouldn't you be seeking revenge a little bit? Nah. Father, don't hold this to their account. Help me reach them. Yeah, but they're treating you so bad. Yeah, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's unheard of. That is a supernatural love. It's when we show love to the unlovable and forgiveness for the unforgivable. When people go, now that's amazing. That's amazing. This in itself is a miracle. That is miraculous. But we don't look at it as a miracle, do we? We just kind of miss the fact that that's a miracle. Well, go out and forgive all those people. Yeah, I don't think I can do that. That would be a miracle, wouldn't it? Yeah. See? It's a miracle. That in itself is a miracle. To love the unlovable and to forgive what is unforgivable. People look at you and say, okay, what is it about you? What is it about you that makes you able to do something like that? When nobody deserves that kind of love. Like, oh, let me tell you. Their first question is, who taught you how to do that? And you're like, oh my goodness, here's the validation. You actually know who I'm connected to, don't you? You know who I'm connected to. I'm his disciple. You know how you figured that out? Because of love. Because of love. That's how they will know that you're his disciple. The church should be showing that a miraculous transformation has taken place. And by the way, people are going to notice. They are going to notice. The church in Acts was this kind of church. They understood that they were made one with God through Jesus Christ. They understood that relationship. We have been made one with Jesus Christ. We have been made one with God because of what he did for us. They also made sure that they expressed that oneness with each other. They were moving together as one, in one accord, as a church. This is how the world will know that you're Christ's disciples, and it's love. They understood that. Love is the miracle they need to see. It's not raising somebody from the dead or helping somebody walk or speaking in a language that I've never even studied myself. That is not what's going to bring people to God. That's not what's going to do it, because Jesus performed many miracles and there's a lot of people that didn't follow him. You remember after the feeding of the 5,000, they came back. Jesus fed them, and then they came back like, we want more. He says, yeah, but see, you're coming to me for physical food. What you need is the bread of life. What you need is that. And they're like, oh, so you're not going to feed us? We're out. Did you not just see 5 loaves and 2 fish turned into like the biggest buffet of all time? Did you not just see that? Yeah, that was an incredible miracle. Then why aren't you chasing after him right now? Because miracles don't persuade people to follow God. They don't. Those miracles confirm that Jesus was God, and those miracles confirmed that the disciples were actually following the one true God. But today, you think it's our calling to put out miracles? It is not. Your calling is to do one specific thing, put out one miracle. That's it. What is it? Love. Love. Oneness. Relationship. That will change the world. By that, they will know you're my disciples. The Christian life should be evidence that miracles still happen. And the church should be that miracle. The church should be that miracle. There are many miracles that happen today all the time, such as cancer going into remission. That's miraculous. That's crazy, because doctors go, okay, yeah, you're all better. What did you do, doc? I didn't do it. But it happened, so we're happy for you. But what do? We explain it away with a natural explanation. You know, cancer went into remission, like, oh, good. Well, we'll give a natural explanation for that, but we don't say, oh, that's a miracle. But miracles happen all the time. They happen all the time today. We just explain them away with natural explanations. But transforming a heart that is hard into a heart that is loving and soft is also miraculous. That is a miracle. People who lay their lives down for each other is amazing and unnatural by the world's definition. Like, I love what I'm watching, but what happened to you? What happened to you? Love is the miracle God told us would verify that we are his disciples, not all these other things. You want to verify that you're my disciple? There's one way you're going to do it, and people are going to pick up on it just like that. When you love the unlovable and you forgive the unforgivable, and when you show grace and mercy and love to somebody and they know they don't deserve it at all, that person goes, okay, who are you with? Because I know that wasn't you before. What happened? What happened? He did. He happened. By that, all men will know that you're his disciple, that you follow God, because of that miracle right there. It's the oneness of a relationship with God that causes people to take notice, not miracles. By the way, if you are able to heal people, which we're not, but if we were able to do that, why wouldn't, if people are really able to do that for other people constantly, why aren't they standing in hospitals instead of church buildings? Why aren't we just in hospitals doing that for people? Because those people have real needs. God's not using that. God's not doing that. Why? Because miracles don't draw people to God. They don't. Think of 2 million people that walked through a Red Sea. The ocean split wide open for them. They walked through on dry land. And what did they do when they got to the other side? You brought us out here to kill us. God has left us. Did you miss the ocean chapter? We walked through. Did you miss that? How about this? Let's make a cow and worship it. That is God. Did you miss what happened at the Red Sea? Miracles don't draw people to God. They never have. They never have. Love draws people to God, and it always has. It's God's love. That is the miracle that God gave you for validation. But we get so caught up in life, and we get so caught up in feelings and emotions and all of that. So-and-so did this to me, so they deserve this. What did you do to God? Did you deserve that? Did you deserve separation from God? Yes. What did you get? Love unspeakable. Grace unmeasurable. In that while I was still a sinner, he died for me. Well, that's a lot of love. Yeah, it's kind of compelling too. Kind of compelling. By this will all men know that you are my disciple. If I heal somebody? No. If I raise somebody from the dead? No. How will they know I'm your disciple? That same kind of love. That will bring people to God. So that's what I give you. That's what I give you. Love is something that will cross every language barrier in the world. You can show love to somebody that you don't even speak the same language to, and they'll be watching you like, what is wrong with this person? Why are they so loving? They don't even know me. It crosses every language barrier in the world. Look at 1 John 5 and verse 1. It says, everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God. And everyone who loves the Father loves whoever has been born of him. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and obey his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. By the way, this isn't talking about the 10 commandments. This is not talking about the law. The commandments of God are very simple. Under the new covenant, the commandments are very simple. Believe and love. That's it. Believe and love. And by the way, you'll keep all those other things when you're doing those two things. Just believe and love. The commandments are not burdensome. By this will all men know that you are his disciples. When we live a life of gratitude and love for God, we also live a life of love for one another. Like, why are you forgiving me? I know I was wrong. Because he forgave me. Just passing it on. Why? What's wrong with you? A whole community of people end up taking care of each other just like the first century church did. That's what happens. Everything changes for us. This would be a miracle that would catch the eye of societies everywhere. Like, what's going on in that little church over there? Oh, they are loving like crazy over there. The unlovable are being loved. The unforgivable are being forgiven. Husbands and wives are coming together because they're showing the love of God to each other rather than holding on to grudges and hurts. They're joining each other. People who have done other people wrong in the past are no longer we're not even focusing on what they did anymore. We're focusing on them as a soul that needs God, and we're loving them instead. People will take notice. Something's happening over there. It's the love of God. And that person is definitely a disciple of Christ. How do you know that? Because that love is unnatural. That is an amazing love. And when people ask, what happened? What happened? We can tell them it was Jesus. Tell them it was Jesus. What happened to you? Why are you so different? Why do you love like you do? Jesus is what happened. That's what happened to me, and that's what can happen to you. By this, all men will know that you're his disciple. Not because you do a bunch of different miracles, but you do one miracle. Love. Love. You show a oneness between you and God, and you love as he loved you. You forgive as he's forgiven you, and you go out there and you change the world because you finally have that validation that you are Christ's disciple. You go out and you love. And that's when they say, what happened? You can say, it was Jesus all the way. It was Jesus.